Awesome. Hi, everybody. Thank you for the opportunity. Katie, thanks for making me aware of this. I appreciate it. And good to see a lot of familiar folks here in the veterans advocate space. As mentioned, Mary Wielander, Representative Wielander, is my older sister, and she's been bossing me around my whole life. So it's just good to take the stage. So I guess, like, when I was asked to come here, I didn't really know what the expectation was, and I think, hearing everybody and what they've said relative to the needs and the issues, a lot of what Bill said really resonated with me. My role, I work at a marketing agency called Cashman Katz in Glastonbury, and I wasn't really aware of the emphasis of manufacturing relative to the veteran population until Katie invited me to moderate the workforce development panel for the Connecticut National Guard's annual conference last year. And that's when it really opened my eyes, when you have two critical industries or infrastructure where there's a clear I need and I have match. I reached out to Paul Lavoie at the time, and I asked him if there was any kind of formal program or connective tissue that was in place that would bridge the gap between the manufacturing industry and the National Guard, because they're so complementary in terms of what the Guard's doing relative to manufacturing as well as additive manufacturing, and what the manufacturing industry here in Connecticut desperately needs, which is to fill over 5,000 positions. No formal bridge existed, but it seemed like an opportunity to explore. Now at the current agency I'm at, the Office of Manufacturing is a client of ours, which has allowed me to dig a little bit deeper within the industry as a whole. One thing became abundantly clear to me, and I think it's been echoed multiple times here relative to communication issues, but I don't know how much people are aware of the complexity and I think the convoluted nature of the manufacturing industry here in Connecticut. Like, it's absolutely insane if you actually take a look. Like, the number of organizations that are involved that are either dictating policy or trying to act as a support mechanism is robust. So, I've already heard the DECD, the Office of Workforce Strategy, the Connecticut Office of Manufacturing. You couple that with the CBIA, you have Advanced CT, you have CONSTEP, you have Manufacture CT, you have the numerous regional sector partnerships. In total, and not even counting the steering committees and organizations within the university system in here in Connecticut, there's at least 40 dedicated agencies or bodies that are meant to support manufacturing and the employers that ultimately ladder up and support the OEMs here in the state. So to hear that communication is an issue is not a surprise. Like, that is obvious. Like, how do you navigate a system where there's no clear platform or champion of a platform in order to anchor things against? And that was one of the things that I wanted to address with the Office of Manufacturing here in Connecticut. When I joined the agency, they'd already been a client, but I saw it as an opportunity to push through an agenda that I thought was important, that I started building with Katie and Bill Polifko over here, which is that bridge between the manufacturing industry and the National Guard. So I developed a program called the Connecticut Commitment to the Troops. And I didn't want to create anything that was groundbreakingly new. I wanted to be able to have an anchor point and a champion, and then I wanted to connect the dots between these two industries in a way that represented a light lift for everybody involved. And it was literally me going out to manufacturers across the state and telling them, if there was a program where the National Guard was able to leverage incentives for recruitment or retention based off of an incentive provided by a manufacturing firm, would you want to be involved? And the answer from everybody is yes. It's if you provide additional training or certification opportunities, preferred hiring, these aren't things that necessitate a huge lift for these participating manufacturing firms. What we're trying to do is give people, I think a mechanism that can be easily latched onto and doesn't represent an incremental burden to their daily operations. But what you need is like a clear champion. Like you need a clear through line, right? Like there needs to be something intuitive and simple and actionable. And communication needs to be flowing between a limited number of parties. But, I rattled off 20 some odd organizations, 15, right? I don't know how many of those organizations are in this room, but if you guys want to be able to create something that's going to be worthwhile and drive change, there has to be representation from the bodies that are out there doing this all the time. And it doesn't have to be everybody, but there needs to be representation. And like, I'm not trying to lecture anybody, but like between, Pomfret was mentioned. I was out in Pomfret, a month and a half ago, and I was speaking to the leadership at Luz & Co., the wire company, the manufacturer out there, and they're leaving $1 million on the table right now because they can't find people to work the shifts that they have. And they want veterans. And Katie and I went out there, and they're reaching out to these different organizations and bodies, trying to figure out, hey, like how do you help me fill these gaps? And I think manufacturers are facing kind of the same issues or challenges trying to navigate the system that veterans face when getting out. It's like with so many different services and so many different organizations all trying to do great things, it's like, where do you start? It's really hard to see the forest through the trees. And I think the ability to create something simple and actionable is really what's necessary. But again, it really does necessitate to have you need to have the right people around the table, and yeah, I think that's a good amount of what I wanted to say. The other thing I wanted to say was, when you look at the current state of our military and our defense, right? It's increasingly technological. We're going to be getting rid of Army pilots pretty soon. We've got manless F-35s that Bill was telling me about, which are terrifyingly cool. My beloved Black Hawk is probably going away. But what that means is that additive manufacturing, I think, should also be part of this. The emphasis that the Guard has on additive manufacturing, the technological expertise that's held by our soldiers needs to be leveraged post-military as well. I think the trades are great. I'm having an addition put on my house right now, and thank God for electricians. But I think a holistic view of what manufacturing is and represents, and the opportunities it creates for veterans should be inclusive. So, and that includes cybersecurity, which Bill and I have talked about, at length, which is probably the biggest threat to national security here in the country. So, yeah, I'm happy to help if you guys need it, but that's pretty much all I wanted to say.
Thank you so much for joining us today. I really appreciate you being here. And I think we would like to make sure we are including everyone. One of the ways we started doing this work was we created a Google file folder of the people who we thought might be interested in it, and then we circulated share access to the folks who we thought might be able to populate more people, and that's how we expanded the invitation list. And we asked people to fill in who else and who else and who else, and I don't know if we even got a third of the people that we needed to be included. And that tells you how hard it is for a veteran or a National Guards member to participate. I want to ask you, before we move on, we want to make sure that we maintain focus between the veterans and between National Guardsmen, the young folks who are entering, 18 to 24-year-olds and joining and looking for career pathways simultaneously to serving in the National Guard. Do you think that any of the mechanisms you talk about think about or consider those opportunities as part of their work, and is there a way naturally to integrate them?
Are you talking about relative to the younger generation of veterans here?
Well, I'm not even talking about veterans. I'm talking about people currently engaged with their National Guard, currently serving in the National Guard. So they're not yet veterans, and they still are looking for traditional day jobs and we want them to be career pathway as well.
Yeah, no, I think, like Katie and Bill and NAGACT, what they're trying to do is move folks out of retail jobs into probably more meaningful and long-lasting careers. Again, that requires partnership with complementary organizations. And, there needs to be it either needs to come from a convening body within one of these manufacturing dedicated organizations, state or otherwise, or I think it needs to come from the universities who have an emphasis on this, whether it's UConn, Yale, the University of New Haven, and what they're doing relative to the research center. I can't remember the exact name, but it's about 130,000 square foot facility that they're building. There's a lot of ready-made assets that can be called upon to work in partnership with. And I think the key is to think about the fact that any partnership needs to have mutual benefit, and there needs to be a very clear value exchange, right? If it seems one-sided and one of the parties doesn't see the ROI from it, then they're not going to go through with it. But if there's the ability to partner with a university universities, doesn't matter which one, desperately need undergraduate students coming in. And if they can bridge that gap by offering a program that eventually becomes a feeder into the student population, and at the same time benefits some of these younger folks, whether they're in the Guard or they're veterans, then it seems like a win-win.
I appreciate that. Any other members of the committee with questions? Dan, Rep. Gayette, sorry.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you, Mr. Barrett, for joining us today. You had mentioned that you had identified about 40 agencies / nonprofits that were kind of doing this work. I was hoping you could elaborate on that and explain where, are they all kind of doing the same thing when it comes to helping veterans? And is there a way we can kind of consolidate that service into kind of one big thing, or is it just kind of their own individual thing?
So the organizations that I mentioned are more focused on the manufacturing and supporting the manufacturers within the OEM supply chain. And it depends on who you ask when it comes to redundancy, but there is going to be some overlap at some point regardless. There's probably there's the same amount or more of veteran service organizations out there, but if there's a way to identify the USPs associated with these individual organizations, so at least you can signpost how to use them effectively, then great. But again, I think everything has to be anchored in a champion, because that's what people want to be able to latch onto, something that's easily identifiable and something that's going to be simple. And so having that kind of that singular platform, I think, would be advantageous.
Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you very much for joining us today.